With the Genestealer cult, and specifically with this detachment, you start battle round 1 and 2 with... And then in the later game, it's more... You have powerful combos and first turn strikes, but as your characters are removed, you don't have the enhancements to advance and charge. You don't get as many rerolls to charge. You just have bodies and desperation. But I really like this detachment. It has great stratagems and I use almost all of them every game. So we'll talk about the enhancements and cool rules, and then I'll talk about units for this detachment in a tier list. I know how much you love tier lists, because if I just show off army lists, which I will, it might not include all the units you want to take, or might not include all of the good units. So I wanted to go over them more beforehand. The Xenocreed Congregation detachment, which I'll often just call Xenocreed, is the Advance and Charge Horde detachment. Its theme is taking one part of the Genestealer cult, which is all of the battle line units and metamorphs, basically the cheaper bodies, and throwing wave after wave of them at the enemy until they either reach their kill limit, or we just control the objectives the whole game and they can never push us off because we always have more bodies coming on and they don't. This detachment is themed around the cult of the Pauper Princes, which is where you see hordes of metamorphs and acolytes just rushing at the enemy, and it's all about protecting the characters. Like in the lore, it's also the Patriarch, but in this detachment, it's more the higher echelon of the cult. The Magus, the Primus, the Icon Ward. The ones that are just below the Patriarch. If you like this detachment too, you should click the nearest conveniently placed like button. The detachment rule lets your Acolyte hybrids of either kind, your Metamorph hybrids and your Neophyte hybrids re-roll advance and charge rolls if they have a character model in the unit. It can be any character model. There is a full stop after that part. It doesn't have to be one of the big three. As long as it's one of those Acolyte, Neophyte or Metamorph units, and they have any character, they re-roll advance and charge rolls. That's really good. It means that if you don't have multiple Primuses, Icon Wards and Magus models, you can still make pretty good use of this detachment because of the Acolytes, Metamorphs and Neophytes. So that's where the limit is placed, on those battle line units and the Metamorphs, which are not battle line in this detachment, which will be important later. In addition to that, if the character model is a Magus, Primus or Acolyte Icon Ward, they have a Feel No Pain of 3+, when leading a unit. That's just that model, not every model in that unit. Just the character model. So you get that 3+ Feel No Pain while your bodyguard unit is alive. If the bodyguard unit dies around them, but the same enemy unit still has more shots to come, you will keep that 3+ Feel No Pain until that enemy unit has finished firing. Then, all of the rules trigger for a unit being destroyed, like you lose a 3+ Feel No Pain, you roll your Cult Ambush test for the dead bodyguard unit, even if the formerly attached like Primus is still alive. The reason it happens in this order is so that rules like Deadly Demise don't trigger in the middle of a shooting attack and mess up which models are left to fire and which models are suddenly dead but may or may not have fired their guns. Oh, if a second unit were to shoot at the lone Primus, there is no protection, there is no Feel No Pain anymore. But this Feel No Pain is useful for keeping the characters alive, and maybe then they can complete an action or do something by themselves. We're less concerned about precision attacks, which often can take the heart out of a Genestealer cult army, and it's harder for your opponents who are taking the fixed assassination mission in Pariah Nexus or Leviathan. But if a player was taking a fixed mission, then they would probably plan their army around that, having enough units to do things like cleanse. It's rare for them to take a fixed mission because of what is in my army. What do they do for their other fixed mission if they haven't planned to take fixed missions beforehand? So, not many people will get a boo from me for taking fixed missions. Most people choose Random Madness Go. The enhancements are strong in this detachment and exemplify the tactics of this way of playing, running screaming at the enemy and running screaming at the enemy with a bunch of your mates behind you. To exemplify that horde aspect, we have the Deeds That Speak to the Masses enhancement. I thought the enhancement to reroll cult ambush tests for battle line units was necessary, but it hasn't done much for me, at all. It may only be good in theory. After 8 games, I have had no real benefit to it. It comes down to the cult ambush being bad. The roll for cult ambush to see if you get a unit back is just the first part. Then remember that this is not a reroll per unit. It is just one of your units per player turn, and you have to be on the board to make it work. And it is only battle line units, so it won't work on metamorphs or pure strains, which are both good choices in this detachment. And because it is an enhancement, your opponent can turn it off by killing the character. Getting one more battle line unit back than you otherwise would, but a unit that has no character attached, has only once got me 5 more victory points. And I won by more than 20 victory points anyway. But with the change to Cult Ambush so we can return by Deep Strike, one of the big problems with Cult Ambush is removed anyway. It doesn't matter if you're losing, you can still come back even if all of your Cult Ambush markers get removed. Your troops may still die in droves, but they come back faster, much faster now that there's an FAQ. You could move in your movement phase and then get wiped out by Overwatch. If you pass that Cult Ambush test, you could then Deep Strike up with a replacement unit at the end of the movement phase in the reinforcement step. So you've been gone from the battlefield for a few seconds. This is much quicker to come back. The Cult Ambush markers are now much like the Space Marine Terminator teleport homer, and we can rapid ingress onto them for free. That is how you should think of Cult Ambush markers. And that's cool, get your units on the board, and in this detachment, advance and charge with a stratagem. This is the Advance and Charge detachment. I'll talk about stratagems as we go, but do whatever is fastest to get your troops on the board where you need them. If you die on your own turn through a bad charge or Overwatch, as a punishment for getting too happy your acolytes blew up a tank and that deadly demise hits, come back through Cult Ambush markers in your opponent's turn. But with the change to Cult Ambush markers, the Downtrodden Rise in its August 2024 form is the only stratagem you won't need. And before the Cult Ambush FAQ, it was the only stratagem in this detachment that I didn't use. Because the Downtrodden Rise is 2 command points to have a unit come on from a board edge 9 inches from the enemy. But we can just Deep Strike now, and it's free. So this stratagem should probably be changed to be like the reinforcement stratagem for the Imperial Guard. So for 2 command points, once per game use, we can get back a unit that failed its Cult Ambush test. That would work. But give it time. Games Workshop changes rules quickly and fixes problems slowly. So Deeds that speak to the masses is not as good as it sounds, but it is still good. If you are playing multiple small units with as many 5-man Acolyte units as you can, then it is more valuable. And it gives you an indicator on army list building for this detachment. Big blocks of Metamorphs, which are not battle line, but smaller Neophyte and Acolyte units. We will be going over some army lists a bit later. I know some people are like, just give me that competitive 2k list. No. Wait. You need to know how to use the units and what other units not found in the list can do. Incendiary Inspiration as an enhancement is more important. It is Advance and Charge in the Advance and Charge detachment. We also have Tireless Fervor, so between the two of them, we can have 2 of our units that couldn't normally advance and charge. And Tireless Fervor is useful because it also lets you fall back and still charge. It's great for getting the units you want to the enemies you want to hit. It lets you control the battle much more. You're not just waiting for the enemy to come close so you can charge the closest enemy and hope that you're able to kill them and then move on to something you actually want dead. But we'll talk more about target priority a bit later in the video. Denunciator of Tyrants is a great one for +1 to hit and +1 to wound. And if you couple this with rerolling ones to hit from any character dying, as we get Vengeance for the Martyr, you're usually hitting with like everything and then having a much better wound chance. The +1 to wound is really good. This is a lot like the Assassination Edict from the Host of Ascension, but better because you get that +1 to wound. The +1 to hit and +1 to wound is only against character units, but that is a common keyword. It applies to the character models like lone operatives, and it also applies to any attached unit. There will be some powerful enemy unit that has a character that you want gone from the game. Also, all of the big knights are characters. +1 to wound against them is super valuable. Those are the 3 enhancements I recommend. If you are playing at 1000 points or less, Denunciator of Tyrants and Incendiary Inspiration are the best ones, as you may not have as many battle line units to need the reroll from Deeds that speak to the masses. The last enhancement is also nice. I don't dislike any of the enhancements in this detachment, but you are limited to 3 enhancements in your army, and in this detachment the enhancements can only go on the Magus, Primus or Icon Ward. Genesire's Reliquant is 5 points, and it lets you reroll a Battle Shock test. Good! That's good. I often have 5 points spare, so if I'm not taking deeds that speak to the masses, I will take the Genesire's Reliquant. And I would put it probably on an icon ward, because the Magos already has an ability to just remove a battle shock, and I want my icon ward and whatever unit they're with, either acolytes or metamorphs, to be able to use stratagems. So not being battle shocked is very important to me. The armies that do the best against us are often the ones that have a, yeah, you just take battle shock tests all over. That's armies like the Dread Talon Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Knights, and, unsurprisingly, Tyranids. While the Magos, Primus and Icon Ward have a good leadership, well, better than the leadership we otherwise have, if we're battle shocked, we can't use any of these stratagems. If we're battle shocked, we're not controlling objectives, and that is the thing that this detachment needs to do. We don't have objectives, we don't have much. So these units that I'm going to talk through now are A tier ones. I'm not going to have a visual on screen which has colours and patterns and represents the different units, because I think you'll be able to understand I'm going to be talking through the units more specifically than just where they rank. But these units are A tier and are units I recommend in this detachment. When I move on to B tier units, I will tell you. So let's start with Metamorphs. They will want Incendiary Inspiration as a character in the unit, or they want to be using Tireless Fervor so that they can advance and charge. This is one of our speedy units. They are able to scout to get up the board faster, and they can do so with an Acolyte Icon Ward, but not any other character. With Hand Flamers, we love to advance and shoot. We have the Transcendent Celerity. So if you have a unit which has Incendiary Inspiration, they will be able to scout move, advance, re-rolling if you have an icon ward in the unit, as an example, which, that would have to be the character so you can still scout. Then we use Transcendent Celerity to be able to shoot and perhaps remove enemy screening units. Then, because we have Incendiary Inspiration on the icon ward in the unit, we can then charge after advancing and shooting. That's very good. But I will say that either loadout of either having lots of hand flamers or lots of auto pistols, well, all auto pistols, is valid. Either way is valid. You get the surge move either way. It's D6 inches if you have any number of hand flamers in the unit. This did get FAQ'd recently. And that is nice for getting up the board on the enemy's turn. And this triggers every time an enemy unit shooting removes one of your models, so it can activate multiple times in the same turn. I like my Metamorphs to have auto pistols because a guaranteed 6-inch surge move gets you up the board so much quicker. Now you may be thinking, oh well, if it's a guaranteed 6-inch surge move, the opponent will just stay like 7.1 inches away. But in the battle, when we get down to it, they're usually not able to, especially if you're contesting an objective. If they want to take that objective from you, they will also have to be on the objective, which means they're going to be within 6 inches. So they will just have to charge you or try and shoot you to death in one shooting attack from one unit. If they fail, you get to move into combat with them and can wipe the enemy unit in combat, and it's your objective and they've lost a unit in their own turn. Metamorphs are great in this detachment. I also recommend Pure Strain Genestealers. They don't get a bonus from our detachment rule or can use any of our stratagems, but they are there to infiltrate, and infiltrating units stops enemy infiltrators, because you can't deploy infiltrators within 9 inches of an enemy unit. And that can give us a corridor for our Metamorphs to zoom straight across the field into the enemy deployment zone without being hit by a roadblock that's infiltrating. And the Pure Strains themselves are great at charging and clearing screens of enemies and cheap enemy units. They too advance and charge, and they have an 8-inch move to start with. We don't have to trade units well as Genestealer Cult. Often just killing the enemy unit is enough because they don't come back. We might. And your Pure Strain Genestealers are a great choice for use on the cult ambush markers, rather than just deep striking in. Because it's like Rapid Ingress, you get back onto the board in your opponent's turn, and then in our turn, you can advance and charge back into combat. Using advance and charge fits with the theme of this detachment. The Goliath Truck is a good unit in any detachment, but in the Xenocreed detachment, we can do the Bunker Truck tactic. This lets you have a safe place to move your troops up. We start with Metamorphs in a truck. The only character they should have is an icon ward if they have a character at all. So, as it's a dedicated transport and they have scout, it can scout 6 inches because the Metamorphs have scout 6. In turn 1, they disembark. Already, we're about 9 inches out of our deployment zone. Then the Metamorphs move and advance. And if you did have an icon ward in that unit, then you can reroll the advance roll. And after that, you'll be able to charge with the metamorph, so you can get a first turn charge from your deployment zone into the enemy deployment zone, with the Goliath truck giving you those extra 3 inches. That's not all the truck is for, because your truck can then move on to an objective, and a unit of acolytes in your deployment zone can advance and embark within the truck. You can embark after advancing. And while the metamorphs are up with the pure strains, the acolytes are safer in the truck. Any anti-infantry firepower is not going to bother them. And then in the next turn, they can get out and charge something, and a different unit could move into the truck. This is our not necessarily mobile, but a bunker. As units like the metamorphs die, when they return, you may be able to advance and charge with them into combat with the stratagem, but if not, advancing into the truck to stay safe from anti-infantry firepower. The truck can go and collect units that have come back through Deep Strike and Cult Ambush and get them back into the fight quicker, and when the unit disembarks from the truck, if the truck shot something at them and your hand flamers then shoot at them, it doesn't matter if they're metamorphs with hand flamers or acolytes with hand flamers, you're re-rolling your wounds on those hand flamers. We have very little good shooting outside of those in this detachment. Re-rolling wounds with hand flamers is very good. The truck lets you do all of that. Plus, it has some nice guns of its own. We can have a lot of acolytes in this detachment. 12 units of acolytes, because the acolytes with auto pistols are battle line and the acolytes with hand flamers are a separate data sheet, and they are also battle line. But 60 to 120 acolytes is a lot of acolytes to paint. They will get the reroll to Cult Ambush from deeds that speak to the masses because they're battle line, and as their battle line in the Pariah Nexus, they get a little bit of an extra bonus. It may be something small, but it could be valuable. Maybe free go to ground, that's quite nice. Or being able to advance and complete actions, well, that's very suitable for this detachment. Acolytes with mining weapons are very good in combat. Damage 3 is powerful against heavy infantry and vehicles, and they have damage 3 while aberrants do not. The real drawback with the mining weapons is you only get 2 attacks, but when you use Frenzied Devotion, you get +1 to hit, so you're hitting on a 2, and you also get an extra attack. So a squad of 10 putting out 18 damage 3 attacks is really good for 140 points. Small squads of 5 acolytes are also really useful. They can do well in this detachment, they can complete actions, and they are the ones that can mine command points from objectives. But in this detachment, we want characters to go with them. I do recommend the Biophagus. While he's not one of the key 3, any character will give you rerolls to advance rolls and charge rolls, as long as it's in an acolyte, metamorph, or neophyte unit. The lethal hits are really good for being able to punch upwards, and once per game, he can make his unit have +1 to wound against infantry. The mining weapons on the acolytes with auto pistols are already anti-vehicle, but against heavy infantry, we struggle a bit more. Toughness 6 on something like aggressors or the 3 wound possessed, they're only being hurt by the mining weapons on a 5+. We can get that to 4+, and then the damage 3 can do its work. The other acolyte squad, the acolytes with hand flamers, they can be very nice. They can advance and still shoot with transcendent celerity. And after you've done that, you could use tireless fervor to be able to charge even though you advanced. You don't need the demolition charges anymore. They worked in the index because they had great stats, but even in Host of Ascension, where you can tunnel crawl, they're not doing too much. Hand flamers with rerolls when you're attacking objectives is very good. This is the unit that clears objectives. The hand flamers auto hit, and so they're also great for Overwatch. Just having a squad with 10 flamers can cause fear in Eldar and Dark Eldar, as so many of their elite infantry are toughness 3. But you can also do these same tactics with metamorphs, which have combat options to have damage 2 or damage 1. The Ridge Runners are very, very useful. Their armor penetration bonus works on shooting attacks and in combat. This makes those hand flamers AP -1. This makes the claws on those acolytes with hand flamers AP -2. And it can make pure strain claws AP -3. It's really good for that bonus. I would strongly consider taking the heavy mining laser because that's an anti-tank cannon. Our infantry horde can struggle against vehicles even with the number of anti-vehicle weapons we have. The problem comes from the big tanks that have big guns that go brrr and remove our infantry squads. We need the Ridge Runner to take care of them. The Primus is good. The Primus is always good, but especially good in this detachment as they are one of the big 3. Their redeployability is still incredibly useful. You can move pure strain Genestealers around in the infiltrating area of the midboard. You can take units that were on the board and put them into Deep Strike, meaning that when you were placing those units on the board, your opponent really had no information or false information about what units they would be facing. So they will have deployed poorly, and you are ready to take advantage of it. The other ability is rerolls to hit, which is going to be great with Acolytes or Metamorphs. If he goes with Metamorphs, then you can't Scout, so it's probably better on Acolyte hybrids, but you do get more attacks at damage 1 with the Metamorphs, so that's more dice that will want more rerolls. Either one is good. And the enhancement Denunciator of Tyrants goes well on the Primus. Bonuses to hit and wound and rerolls go well together. Alternatively, Incendiary Inspiration because he wants to be in combat. He's happy there, and he's going to take his unit with him. The Locus is another really good character. We are focusing on combat in this detachment, and with a Locus we can reroll our advance rolls and reroll our charge rolls. Also, we have either through the stratagem Path of Anguish on the Neophytes or the Acolytes, or Metamorphs have their Brood Surge move, so we can get shot and then go into combat with the enemy. Often we will fight before opponents, but fight first on the Locus means we fight before any enemies that charged in to save that unit that we moved into. It's also great for avoiding charges, because if the enemy knows you have fight first, and there's a bunch of Acolytes waiting there spinning their mining drills, the enemy will be less keen to charge you at all. So you can just keep the objective. The Icon Ward is A tier in this detachment, but probably not in the others anymore. He gives a 4+ feel no pain to Metamorphs, which is great, and can still Scout with them as he has Scout. The 4+ feel no pain feels so much stronger than 5+, and as a character, he can double up with someone like a Locus or a Biophagus in an Acolyte or Neophyte unit. Not Metamorphs. I've made that mistake before, but only while chatting, not in a game. Not Metamorphs. So with a Locus, an Acolyte squad would have a 5+ feel no pain to resist shooting, and fight first to resist enemy combat. That's very useful, but the Icon Ward's other ability to rescue a blip is not very valuable, as the blips are more like rapid ingress tokens now. We can arrive from Cult Ambush without them. The Neophytes are more at the low end of A tier, as they don't get as much of a bonus here compared to the Acolytes and the Metamorphs. Advance and Shoot as a stratagem can be useful on them, but the stratagem I want to specifically mention for them is Frenzied Devotion. If you are facing a similar cheap horde unit like Cultists, Imperial Guard Squad, or Termagants, getting to double your attacks, 1+1 is 2, and hitting on a 3+ is useful for clearing them. And don't forget about your pistols. We are one of the few toughness 3 hordes that gets pistols, so don't forget them. That's 2 things we have to get rid of the enemy hordes with our hordes. And Path of Anguish is a useful stratagem, not to get into combat, but to get out of line of sight if multiple enemies are shooting at you. You move towards the closest one, which could mean you end up behind a building and out of line of sight from other units. Then the Magos. Yes, they are A tier in this detachment. They are the cheapest of the 3 characters that can take enhancements, so that's useful in itself. But this is probably the only detachment where you would see a Magos. As a cheap character, they can just be used to complete actions, and if they die, when they die, we have the stratagem Vengeance for the Martyr, which means that all of your units reroll hit rolls against the enemy that killed the Magos. Now it's going to depend on which enemy unit it was. If it was a squad of 5 Celestian Sacrosants, maybe we won't use it. If it was the Castigator, yeah, that's when we use it. Full rerolls to hit against the Castigator is going to be great for the Acolytes with their anti-vehicle weapons. I think these units are all really good. So before we continue with the tier list, here is a 1000 point list using just those good units. This 1000 points list is hot. I'll explain. More tournaments are playing 1250 points or similar sized lists. Or Crusade weekends are all at 1000 points. And you can really enjoy playing a 1000 point game, and it doesn't take all day to casual level. Opponents that come into 1000 point games with 2 big blocks of units are immediately giving up like 3 out of the 5 objectives. Because even at 1000 points, there are the same number of objectives, unless it's like certain Crusade games. We can take advantage of that because we have a lot of bodies, even though we don't have the deeds that speak enhancement. Metamorphs are good, and you can have them with hand flamers or auto pistols, whichever you prefer. But remember that they have a 5+ feel no pain, and Acolytes with an Icon Ward also have a 5+ feel no pain. And they can reroll their advance and charge rolls, and they are objective control too. So when Acolytes come back, if they come back through Cult Ambush, they have the objective control to hold objectives, while Metamorphs may not. Both units are good. So when I'm looking at the top of this list, There are options, because you don't decide which character is with which unit until the game itself. You don't do it in the list building part. I've just put it there as an example, a convenient example. If I needed to scout to go fast, I would put the icon ward with the metamorphs. If I thought I should play a little more cagey and the terrain would let me move units up behind a building easily enough, I would put the Primus with the metamorphs and they would get the rerolls to hit. I could also see which enemy I want to kill with Denunciator of Tyrants. If an enemy character was a vehicle, like Longstrike or the Silent King, who is probably a bit much for 1000 points, I would put the Primus with Denunciator of Tyrants with the Acolytes with auto pistols and go for him. The Magus has Gene Sire's Reliquant. I didn't have enough points for deeds that speak, but being able to re-roll Battleshock tests to score objectives, which you can't do if you're Battleshocked, that's really nice. And it gives resistance to other abilities that cause you to take Battleshock tests, such as Shadow in the War. It is worth 5 points. The Magus is the Warlord because they are the most likely to live. When they're with the Acolytes with Hand Flamers, they aren't necessarily diving face first into combat, which is what the Primus is doing and what the Icon Ward is doing with their respective units. I included 10 Neophytes because we want to sticky our home objective and then move up onto other objectives. Sticky objectives is great at 1000 points. And if you can keep the enemy back with other units and bleed them of their smaller units, you can control the board even if all of your units are dead and didn't return by cult ambush. If the enemy has completely wiped you on their turn 4, you can still score primary victory points in turn 5, and your opponent may not be able to get full victory points at the end of their turn 5. I have 5 Pure Strain Genestealers to upset enemy infiltrators and give you a clear path through to the enemy deployment zone. The central objective is a good one to pick for that, but if enemy infiltrators got there first, a far flank also works. I've got 1 Ridge Runner with the heavy mining laser to attack enemy vehicles and put extra AP on them for the Acolytes with auto pistols and mining weapons. We have the Spotter so that we can hit better. We don't need the Survey Auger because the main gun we're shooting with other units is the Hand Flamer, which ignores cover anyway. The Flare Launcher is nice because we don't want to die, but if we want enemy units shooting at us to be -1 to hit, then we have the Magus that helps with that. And the last unit could have been another Ridge Runner with a mortar. It could have also been 5 Acolytes with Hand Flamers, as they are OC2, but I went with the Metamorphs because I like the Feel No Pain for resistance against enemy Deep Strike attacks. The Metamorphs have Hand Flamers. This is also the Hand Flamer detachment. We must protect, and or maybe sabotage, the Prometheum drilling. Hand Flamers dissuade so many enemy units from trying it because of Overwatch. If the enemy attack the Metamorphs, we can Brood Surge towards them and prevent the enemy from charging onto the objective. Or, it stops units like Gargoyles or Seraphim from just moving onto the objective after shooting. The enemy would get to choose which order the rules happened in, whether the Gargoyles moved first or the Metamorphs surged first, but either way, we can keep the enemy off our home objective. And while this 1000 point list can show off a lot of the good units we have in this detachment, you absolutely can swap the 5 Metamorphs for 5 Acolytes with Hand Flamers, and then switch the Magos to be an Icon Ward. That way, our 3 big units of 10 Acolytes, 10 Metamorphs, and 10 Acolytes with Hand Flamers, all of them can have a 5+ Feel No Pain, either from Icon Wards or naturally from Metamorphs. That's a little bit of toughness to keep us going through the early fights. But since this is the only detachment where you consider taking a Magos, I want to use my Magos. Maybe the Magos could be B tier. But let's talk about other B tier units. These are good units that we'll probably want in our army, but you'll have better success with A tier units. It depends on your collection, so don't feel bad if you have to dip into the B tier and it's not all A tier models. If you are at max Acolytes and Metamorphs from your collection and still have many points left and still want to use this detachment but not go as hard into the stratagems and detachment rules, these units are good choices. Starting with Big Hammer Lady. My model is Big Hammer Lady, so we call her Big Hammer Lady. Otherwise you may know her as the Abominant. The Abominant is really good for completing actions and secondary missions, because if you deep strike her into whatever table quarter, even if she dies, she can get back up and still be in the enemy backline to score again next turn. She has a very big hammer for smashing enemy vehicles and monsters, and that's the bit we usually struggle with. And the super fun thing is, when she goes down even just the first time, she counts as being destroyed. So we can use Vengeance for the Martyr so that all of our units can reroll hit rolls of 1 against whatever unit put her down, even though she's got back up. Sadly, she can't avenge herself because the rerolls only apply to acolytes, metamorphs, and neophytes, but that would be really funny. It's already really funny to have her being avenged even though she's right there. She's fine. The Patriarch is useful for giving devastating wounds to a unit of Genestealers, which lets them punch up into tougher enemies like light tanks and heavy infantry. While you may want the Ridge Runner to support, you probably want Ridge Runners firing their mortars to support Metamorphs, the Patriarch can let you get rid of Space Marine screens where -2 AP may not do the job. The Kellamorph is a unit that can complete secondary missions, and they can move away from enemies to stay alive, same as with the Sanctus. If you have the Sniper version, they can shoot pretty well, that's a strength 7 shot, and you can have rerolls to hit and rerolls to wound against one particular target, and there's Anti-Psyker 2+, which can be useful against, say, psychic monsters, and they too have a reactive move to get away from enemies. The Reductus Saboteur can also perform secondaries. They can infiltrate to help keep enemy infiltrators away, just as the Pure Strains do. But her reactive bombs are 9-inch range now, and she can be shot within 12 inches through Lone Operative. She's not as good as in the Index. All of these lone characters are fine, but they cost about as many points as 5 Acolytes, who can also perform actions on secondary missions. They get the Battle Line bonus in Pariah Nexus to maybe do better, and they get the Detachment Stratagems. The Nexus is useful for using more of them stratagems, but they don't really want to be dragged forward into the fight with advancing and charging units. They suit shooting detachments better. Their other ability to move blips around is okay, but we know it's far less valuable now that we can just deep strike from Cult Ambush. But you can be more aggressive and push the ambush markers forward, making it really tempting for your enemy to move poorly to get rid of those markers. And then we've got the C tier units, the ones that are bad and don't do very much for this detachment. After I've gone through them, we will look at tactics for the Xenocreed Congregation. So there's the Jackal Alphas. For snipering, the Sanctus is a better sniper, and they have Lone Operative. And if you're putting the Jackal Alphas in a unit of Jackal Bikers, the Jackal Bikers are getting nothing from the detachment rule or the stratagems, and under the current August 2024 points, Pure Strains and the units advancing and charging can get up the board quickly and are cheaper. Metamorphs and Pure Strains work better in this detachment. And the Jackal Bikers are not getting any benefit from the FAQ to say, yeah, you can come back through Deep Strike. They are still limited to having to come back through their restrictive rule next to the board edge, because they don't have the Deep Strike rule. Then Aberrants. Sorry, this is where they are in this detachment. They are C tier. Even with a character, they don't get the detachment bonus. That reroll advances and reroll charges is limited to the Metamorphs, Acolytes, and Neophytes. Compare the Aberrants to the Metamorphs. 5 Aberrants is about the same points as 10 Metamorphs, and the attacks can be damage 2 with the Metamorphs. The attacks are damage 2 with the Aberrants. You will take the Metamorphs every time, surely. And I have a better comparison of the Aberrants and the Metamorphs in this Metamorph focused video. What you can do is mix in your Aberrant models to represent Acolytes with heavy mining weapons and Metamorphs. They use the same base size and are about the same size as models. That's what I have been using my Aberrants for in this detachment. We have the Clamavus. They can be useful for preventing deep strike from enemies, but we have so many units in this detachment because we're playing it as a horde that there is rarely free space for the enemy to appear anyway. You can use a Clamavus to keep the character with deeds that speak safe, but more bodies can do that better. If you have 10 neophytes spread out, that's going to fulfill the job just as well. The Benefictus is our new character from the Codex. They give lethal hits on shooting. We're not doing much shooting outside of hand flamers, which auto-hit, so they don't benefit and can't benefit from lethal hits. And if you think of their cannon brain as like, there's the las cannon shot. A Ridge Runner is better and cheaper and supports the army much more by increasing the armor penetration of our units. The Rock Grinder has a smaller carrying capacity, so it doesn't work as well as a bunker, and the Goliath Truck is cheaper. The Rock Grinder does have a big gun, but the Ridge Runner has a big gun and is cheaper, and the Ridge Runner also gives extra armor penetration to our units. And then the Frag Drill. We mustn't forget the Frag Drill, as it is part of the army that we can field. but it's a nice bit of terrain that you can't buy from Games Workshop anymore. Its ability to protect cull ambush markers, we don't need to protect cull ambush markers. We could just deep strike instead if all of our cull ambush markers were removed. And in this detachment, we have icon wards aplenty to protect cull ambush markers. So no frag drill, even if you're playing with legends. Right, let's talk about tactics for this detachment. You want bodies on objectives. Rapidly pouring acolytes and neophytes onto objectives where their high objective control will help you hold them. We have some units that can kill, I've told you what they are. They're the ones with like denunciative tyrants, larger groups of acolytes with mining weapons. But you need to be careful with your targets. Thankfully, we have the speed and deep strike to be able to pick what we want dead. So we have to think cleverly. Get rid of the weak enemy units with high objective control. So that's Imperial Guard infantry squads, battle sisters with a dogmata that boosts their objective control to 3, waves of Necron warriors. All of these are units that seem bad against other armies, are what we need to kill now in the early turns of the game. Because in the later game, and that may be turn 3, when we have lost our characters and a lot of the power has gone out of our army, we need to be able to out-objective control the opponent. Having played Chaos Space Marines in many editions, it is the Chaos Cultists that win the game. The Chosen kill things, and maybe the Chosen die or don't die, it doesn't matter. As long as the Cultists are alive, I could win the game. You also want to get rid of units that shred light infantry, things like aggressors or Tau battlesuits with flamers. Then, you will be able to survive on the objectives and score them in the later game. Units like hammerheads, we don't care. How many attacks do they have? Can they wipe out 10 objective control 2 models? Because if they don't kill them all, then the cult icon will bring back at least 3 models in the command phase and now we out-objective control them again. A monster that does 4 damage but only has 5 attacks? Leave it alone! Get rid of the enemy units that will be a problem in the late game when we are recycling our many infantry units and their stratagems like reinforcements to return units are once per game. This is target priority and you have to think of the game as a whole. Maybe your acolytes with mining weapons could do some damage to a Leman Russ, but if you have the option to just wipe out an Imperial Guard squad, that will be better. Then, advance and charge! This is the advance and charge detachment. How many times have I said that now? Get your units into combat. We can't do too much outside of that. And even if we are shooting with our hand flamers, which are very good, combat is where we excel. And think about your chargers. Learn to charge through walls. You can't be hit by Overwatch that way. And you don't need line of sight to declare a charge. It seems wrong. It's like I should be able to see my opponent, but you can charge through a solid block wall with infantry. Infantry can move through walls. Charge from turn 1 with pure strains, and we have the speed with the pure strains to target the right unit. What an Imperial Guard player sees as a disposable screen to protect their Leman Russ, we see as priority threat to victory. When you can advance and charge with pure strains, with a unit that has incendiary inspiration, with a stratagem, with a reroll to both advance and charge rolls, you can get to objectives, and importantly, when using cull ambush markers, you can get back into the fight quicker. While the Biosanctuary Brood Surge and the Host of Ascension may prefer the FAQ version and go for deep strike every time, the Xenocreed likes using the cull ambush markers because it is like having rapid ingress. And with enough bodies in front, your ambush markers won't get removed before you arrive from them. We like cull ambush because unlike deep striking, we can move, and when we move, we advance. And in this detachment, we can advance and charge. If your unit died in your turn 3, you can be back in engagement range on your turn 4. Keep up the pressure on the enemy, and in the late game, even if you don't wear the enemy tougher units down through attrition, you can still hold the objectives. So let's look at a 2000 point list to wrap up this video. We have a Magos all alone. They are present on the table so that we can avenge the martyr, and you can choose which unit you can put that on, sort of, by choosing to charge a unit that you want to die against and then get vengeance against. Enemies can't choose not to fight in close combat, while they can choose to not shoot you with bullets. And we can inconvenience a big enemy Death Star or Titanic unit shooting with their ability to cause -1 to hit, and the Magos can also complete actions and secondary missions if you have them come on from a board edge. The Sanctus is also acceptable as an alternative as they have lone operative. and they cost the same number of points. We have an Abominant, so we can also get Vengeance for the Martyr on them, which is funny. And a unit that is getting +1 to hit from Denunciator of Tyrants, or +1 to hit because of Frenzied Devotion. All they need is reroll hit rolls of 1. The Abominant can provide that, and still be there. The Abominant is good for rushing in and hammering, or deep striking to complete secondary missions, and maybe doing some hammering as well. Our other Magos has Deeds That Speak, because in a bigger game, we are taking a lot more small battle line units. So we have a lot more units where we might want that reroll. It's only 1 reroll per turn, and it's only on our battle line units, but it could be, in theory, more effective. And if you can't fit in an extra unit with your 25 points, this is the enhancement to get. We put it on the Magos who's going to be staying at the back, because counterintuitively, he's not doing anything. They just stay still and stay safe. He is the cheapest of the 3 characters that could have this enhancement, so that's why it goes on the Magos. And we don't need line of sight for mind control, and it can be 24 inches once per game when needed, so he's a unit to stay at the back. He's gonna have a unit of 10 neophytes with him. That gives you a large area, similar to a Clamavus size area, to prevent deep strike. And they have sticky objectives, so they can sticky our home objective, and then when it's safe, when the enemy reserves have all been deployed, then we can move off and go on to other objectives. 10 neophytes keeps the Magos safer than 5 acolytes would. 10 models with a banner is more survivable to keep the Deeds That Speak alive. And because they have a character with them in this detachment, we can reroll advance rolls to get to another objective and sticky it in the next turn. With just 5 acolytes, you might think, yeah, I do need a Clamavus to keep the model safe. If that's where you are putting 70 points anyway, sure, but the neophytes work better. 70 points for 10, or 70 points for 5. These models have 1 wound either way. In the later game, the neophytes will be moving up to the mid-board objectives, otherwise they will just complete actions in the deployment zone and be in table quarters. Their weapons don't matter too much, but I would say a grenade launcher, a Weber, a heavy stubber, and a mining laser. I picked the heavy stubber over the seismic cannon because it has longer range. I picked the mining laser over the seismic cannon because it has a better chance of taking down tanks. We have 20 Pure Strain Genestealers to block off enemy infiltrators. They could be redeployed with the Primus later if they're not in a good spot. There's a squad of 10 with the Patriarch to advance and charge. In this detachment? No. Really? Yes. Devastating Wounds is useful for getting rid of tougher enemies, while Hand Flamers can clear weaker enemies. If you don't like Devastating Wounds and just want your Pure Strains to block enemy movement, you could switch the Patriarch for another Acolyte squad of either kind, or 5 Metamorphs. But we're close to 100 models in this army already. How many more models do you want to paint? The other Pure Strains are split into 2 units of 5 to more inconvenience the enemies, and then we could have some units in the mid-board straight away to score secondary missions. The Metamorphs are within icon wards so that we can keep Scout. They are going to go fast and use the truck bunker tactic. They and the Pure Strains should be charging the first turn, whether we go first or the enemy goes first. I have Hand Flamers in this unit to clear screens so that we can get to the units behind. Incendiary Inspiration lets us advance and charge. Transcendent Celerity lets us shoot even though we advanced. They are quite tough-ish because they have a 4+ Feel No Pain and they have a cult icon so that they can bring back models. So only 9 Hand Flamers in this squad. But when you're putting it near the enemy, maybe the enemy isn't going to be able to wipe them all out at once. So having a cult icon to bring back some more models who do have Hand Flamers, that's very valuable. There are 10 Metamorphs with auto pistols, and with the FAQ, they can still have a cult icon and have characters without auto pistols without losing the surge move bonus. They have a Locust to fight first. They want to take the center of the board. With a 6-inch Brood Surge move when they get shot, which can be done multiple times, that's great. The Locust lets you fight first even if you smash into an enemy unit that has fight first, like the Ryans, because the non-active player picks a unit with fight first. There is a Biophagus, which lets Acolytes reroll advanced and charge rolls, and to give them some more anti-infantry power to go with their keyword, anti-vehicle power. This is the unit that wants to get into the truck after the Metamorphs have gotten out of the truck. Then you could either move to another objective, or you can just stay safe and be a second wave after the Metamorphs. There's a Primus with Denunciator of Tyrants to take out enemy character blocks. I've tried it against monsters that are characters, and it doesn't work well if they are big like a Tervagon or a Hive Tyrant. but wounding toughness 6 characters on a 4+ is better than what we would have before. They're a great choice for Frenzied Devotion. Just do as much damage as you can as soon as possible, because you don't really get a second go, because as soon as the Primus dies, you lose so much of the power of this unit. And when we come back through Cult Ambush, if we come back through Cult Ambush, which is still on a 4+ or a 5+, you don't come back with the characters. Then you just have 10 Acolytes with hope. There's a squad of 5 Acolytes with auto pistols. They will have a cult icon and 3 mining weapons. They are there for completing secondaries and generating command points by controlling objectives. There are 2 squads of 5 Acolytes with hand flamers, and all of them have hand flamers, so no cult icon there. They will be burning enemies off objectives, and they can deep strike in and do that. This is especially good on the enemy home objective because they tend to be pretty lightly defended. The icon is optional. Probably just the 5 hand flamers, because we can maybe come back through Cult Ambush, and having 1 reroll from the Deeds That Speak enhancement may help. 5d6 hand flamers rerolling wounds against units on objectives, and then when you add in -1 AP from a Ridge Runner, it can kill aggressors and Plague Marines. And you might as well try and charge as well, because then, if we still have that Ridge Runner bonus, it lasts until the end of the turn, so now their Cult Claws are AP -2. Still very useful. Just because they don't have mining weapons doesn't mean that these Acolytes aren't good in combat. There are 2 Ridge Runners. One has the Mortar to support where it can't see, and that also keeps it safe from enemy shooting, and it gives out that important extra armor penetration. They have a Spotter to counteract the -1 to hit from firing indirectly, so that they're still going to be firing on a 4+. The other Ridge Runner also supports us with the extra AP, but that has the big mining laser so that we can try and take out some of them big enemy monsters and vehicles that threaten our horde models. Somewhere in all of this army, I am sure you'll have found time to click the subscribe button. This comes to 1,995 points, and I would love to have a 5-point enhancement too, but you only get a max of 3 enhancements allowed. There are many other detachments to cover, and I have an overview of all of them in this video. Let me know in the comments of this video now if you like this style, and which detachments you want to see next. My darlings and viewers, advance and charge!